Just fix it in post.
Oh yeah, that's great, but we'll never use it.
There's no budget, and it was due like yesterday.
There's been a slight change in direction.
I promise, it's just one last revision.
Welcome to Just Fix It in Post, industry insights straight from the source. I'm your host, Sean Rice, and welcome. A true powerhouse in content strategy and AI, she's behind some of the most impressive media innovations you've probably interacted with without even knowing it. From Google's 30 billion daily impressions to her latest role at Shutterstock, she's been shaping how we create share experience content. Whether she's managing global teams or harnessing the power of generative AI, she's always at the forefront of what's next. Let's give a warm welcome to Anna Dickson. So I am beyond excited to have you.
Yeah.
I feel like it's been like forever since I've seen you last. I mean, I think we met at the Palm Springs Photo Festival.
Yeah.
I think
Palm
way
Springs
back in the
Photo
day.
Festival. Yeah.
And the last time I saw you was at Google in New York.
Yeah.
And then you were just,
Been a minute.
sky's the limit since then.
Thank you for having me, and I'm super glad that you reached out. We also go back really far. You've known me through a lot of my career, which is pretty cool. I can't say there's a lot of people that I've known for that long, so it was great to hear from you, and I'm super glad to talk to you today.
Tell me, how did the woman I met at the Palm Springs Photo Festival end up as the VP of Shutterstock?
It's been a journey for sure. I think when we met the Palm Springs Photo Festival, I had a few different roles, but all of them were really in publishing in some capacity, whether it was in print publishing at magazines or I was working online. After I graduated from college, I went to school for photography, that I was working in the publishing industry, which is like my absolute dream. But it was also in the early 2000s when print publishing started to really sort of struggle as digital and mobile came up. I was working as a photo editor in print magazines, at Guitar World Magazine and Rolling Stone. I migrated my interned at AOL and migrated back online, working at iHeartRadio and Huffington Post. And that was really a lot of the time that I spent where I was heavily doing a lot of photographer portfolio reviews and hiring for shoots. But I found through those roles that I nerdily had a passion for sort of just content distribution and the changing technological advances that were impacting our industry in a pretty heavy way. And it was having a lot of conversations with content creators who were being impacted, who were very fearful, who weren't sure what to do. Everything from the transition from film to digital to mobile to the rise of social. And it just felt very sort of tumultuous throughout the early stages of my career. But I found those things fascinating and interesting. I eventually landed at the Wall Street Journal, which felt very print and digital at the time, doing a bit of both. Working as deputy photo director there, a role from Google came across my desk. Somebody sent it to me and said, "This sounds like you." And I read it and I was like, wow, it does kind of sound like me. That's really weird, because it's at Google, and that's surprising that they would be looking for somebody who is interested in imagery and content management, because you think of Google as this giant technology company beast. And I applied and interviewed, totally thought I bombed that interview like crazy, and was shocked when I got a call that they were offering me the job. I was very surprised, and took it. I had already started in some of my previous roles dipping my toe into product without even realizing it, just thinking through how to do a better job getting content into the hands of newsroom editors, how to get content faster. Again, with like the rise of mobile, we're seeing images on social of news events at Huffington Post. How do we get this new technology and harness it in a way that's going to benefit us as, content creators and content specialists? And that's sort of what the role became at Google, and it just sort of grew from there. And I started working with product teams and working with engineers and figuring out how do we build a system that'll deliver this content in a certain way. And of course, Google has it like the entire scope of the web. So I think what gets very confusing for people about what my role is I have people that joked. Friends of mine will always joke and say, because I worked on image search for quite a while, when you type in cat into image search, I'm responsible for all the cat photos that come up, which is not what my job was at all whatsoever. But I loved that. But It was to work with product teams that don't have content from the open web. Like if you think about the assistant home hub that people have in their living rooms or kitchens, and you can say to it, how tall is so-and-so, and an image of that person will come up with the content. The images that are coming up that are not from the open web came from the systems that I was working on to bring content into products across Google, and working with product teams to understand their content needs, what they were missing, how do you measure what's working, what's not. I was really using my content expertise and what I knew of the content space and bringing it to a technology company and trying to understand how you bridge that gap between this growing world for a place that needs a ton of content all the time, and how we can bring those sort of two worlds together. And of course, AI is started out of that and working with research teams. And finally, similarly, somebody said, this other job sounds like you. And I looked at this role at Shutterstock and I was like, oh my God, that sounds like me. I think we're in a really, really interesting time for the industry overall. And I have been so appreciative of my time at Google beyond belief. I've learned so much being there and worked with some unbelievable and incredible people, and was given so much incredible opportunity, and felt like I was a voice of the industry inside that company. And now I feel like I can be a voice who's had some experience in a big tech company within the industry as well, in the content industry. It's nice to be here and sort of bringing that interest and expertise back to this type of company and community as well. So that's how I've landed at Shutterstock. I haven't been at Shutterstock very long. I'm officially 6 months today. I just got an email.
Congratulations. That is
Thank
awesome.
you. Right before this, I looked at my email and I was like, 6 months, and I've made a deal that I have to stop saying I'm new at 6 months. So I forwarded the email to my boss and said, okay, I'm done. Fine, I've been here long enough.
That's great. What really drew you in this direction? When you made the decision to go to Shutterstock, what was kind of what drew you into that particular opportunity or challenge?
So two things. I say two things. There's probably like 100 things. I think one aspect of it, what I considered a content person in a tech company, and a lot of the perspective I gave, and I, again, worked with amazing people, really felt like I was driving my perspective and my vision and my goals. And the fact that Google gave me the freedom to do that was awesome. And there was a lot of education and a lot of collaboration on that front, which was amazing. And Shutterstock, literally the core business, right? Like they think about content every single day. The people who are contributing the content, the people who are consuming the content, the people who work there, who are living with the content and figuring out how to manage the content. So everybody is constantly thinking about creative and content and the various different applications. That was very, very, very appealing to me, to be able to go and work with people who love and care about the same sort of world that I care about. So I was very excited to do that. Another, I guess you could say, pivotal moment in the industry overall, where I think people are really very nervous about AI. You hear this too, like people were very nervous about digital, and people were very nervous about mobile, and people were very nervous about social. Like we all hear that. And yes, I think AI is going to have a major, major impact on everything that we do. I went to school for photography. I am more than just someone who presses a shutter button too. So I'm excited by the opportunity to be in a place where we are looking at what the opportunities are, yes, what the challenges are, but also what are the new opportunities that come out of that? How do we leverage that? How do we move forward in a way where we're not just surviving, but thriving and bringing our expertise into the industry in this new space at the end of the day?
When you were at Google, how early on did AI become a part of the conversation?
I think a lot of the things that we did work with research teams. Google has a responsible AI team that we worked very closely with. And part of the goal of the responsible AI team is, as it says, to make responsible AI. Some of the things that they think about are diversity and inclusion, and they try and make sure that their products are inclusive. So we did work pretty heavily with those teams to think through some of the challenges with ensuring that there was fair and balanced content sets and that things were less biased. So we were doing that pretty early on. And I think well before generative took off in the last few years. And I think other areas that I got very involved in a little bit later were things like the launch of IPTC metadata on our generative content and saying, like, if there is IPTC metadata that denotes that something is generated, we weren't necessarily saying, and there's a lot of reasons for this, and there's some really interesting challenges with labeling AI generated content that exist, but surfacing the information to let users know that that metadata is there. And that's not just for AI, right? Like right. Google surfaces metadata if there's credit information, if there's, I think it's copyright, credit, creator, I think is the three fields that they will bring up. So that information is surfaced, and they just added digital source field as another thing to surface, but that was only a starting point. So then there were discussions. Google has joined C2PA and has committed to showing C2PA, I believe, and I think they've recently announced in a couple places that different parts of the organization are starting to move in that direction. So some of those are some of the other areas that you wouldn't necessarily think, yes, there's training data, there's responsible AI, but there's also things to think through in terms of how you're surfacing the content overall. When
Adobe kind of adopted generative, I volunteered in my kid's class, and she was in kindergarten, and the teacher started taking, they would make like little elf ornaments. So I said, hey, wouldn't it be cool to like take pictures of them and I can generate a shelf of a fireplace for them to be on for the little ornament type thing. So I started doing that for all the kids, and I noticed this odd bias that when I had children that were not white, they were African-American or Hispanic, background that was generating was not as picturesque as the ones of the other children.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is crazy. So is this something that you deal with in terms of the content that you guys are generating, or in terms of?
So, I mean, yes and no, I guess I would say. I think it's definitely something that, like a responsible AI team and anybody who is working in this space, if they don't have a team that's looking at exactly that, they should, and they have to, because the impact of that is dangerous at the end of the day. And one of the things I find is interesting is it brings to light a lot of these biases that are present clearly in society today that I think have probably been less visible or buried, and are showing through things like this. It's fascinating to hear that, and disappointing, quite frankly, that manifests in that way. It's just sad to hear that. But yes, I think if a research team identified that as an issue, that I don't know the mechanism that they would take to address that technically. Unfortunately, right. I am not an engineer. I'm a content person. But if one of the solutions to doing that was through fine-tuning data sets, and they needed data sets to be able to do that, then yes, we would collaborate on what that would look like, and help them move in that direction. But I think that there's probably, in your description of what that is, a lot of other problems that exist that may be less geared towards that. And then I think there's questions, that it's a much more technical question than I can answer.
Of course.
Well, but if somebody needed a data set that would keep that from happening, then yes, I think we could help with that. Yeah.
With the content that you guys are offering, what percentage of it is photoreal, say, merged with AI, and then strictly AI on its own in terms of?
So Shutterstock does have our own AI generator, is ethically sourced content, and everything is generated from licensed data. So I know that exists. On the marketplace side, we don't currently accept AI generated content. A big reason for that, we do feel strongly that it is ethically sourced. I will tell you from my experience, and I think you mentioned Adobe earlier. I know Adobe has a lot of tools that they're releasing that allow for AI generation. And certainly there's, in painting and out painting and all sorts of things that you can do with AI that fall within the editing realm. And I think there's interesting sort of philosophical questions to have. And when you think certainly about editorial, what's okay, what's not okay, what can you do, what should you do, how important is it that you start to disclose when something happens, how much do customers and consumers care? All of those questions are very complex, and I think people are still working through those. So, we don't accept AI-generated content today. I think part of that reason is that there are generators out there that aren't necessarily ethically sourcing their content in the same way that we are. Do I think it's hard to detect and getting harder to detect what is AI generated? Yes. So, I think we have to think over time what that looks like for us overall. I don't think that's just a problem for us. Somebody conversationally the other day said to me that their feed on a certain platform is like a bunch of AI generated content now. And that used to be like stuff that was real, that they cared about, that they were interested in engaging with. And all of a sudden it's just a ton of AI cartoon sort of characters. And they're like, where did this come from? It's essentially a problem that lots of products have and people are grappling with now, which is, what do we do in this space now that there's all this new content being generated? What's useful, what's not? What do people want and what do people not want? And how do you balance those two things with being ethical, with being responsible? It's hard. It's a very, very hard problem to solve, and I think it's going to take some time.
Are people coming to you for AI generated content, or just...
Yeah.
So how is the business split up for you in terms of, AI generated versus photo real versus maybe integrated?
I don't totally know exactly how it's split up. I work with the AI generated team, but I don't manage all the AI generated content. We have another team that's dedicated to focusing on AI. In our recent earnings call that came out this week, our CEO, Paul Hennessy, talked about the fact that people are coming to Shutterstock to generate content. But one of the interesting things that we're finding is they're generating content, but they're also new customers too, who are also starting to just buy stock content as well. And I don't think I have enough information to know why that is, exactly, and what sort of they see as the opportunity of either or. I've personally talked to people who, I've said, oh, why don't you just generate that? And they're like, I don't have time to figure out the prompt, and it's actually more work, and I don't know how to and if I just go and search for this one thing, I get back what I want, or it's good enough or close enough to what I know I want, or I know it when I see it, versus iterating on prompts and changing them and tweaking them or putting something in and getting a little frustrated. But I've also had great experiences playing with AI generators too. It sort of depends on who you are. I think people come to us for both, which has been really interesting. And I think even surprising to everybody is it's a new world we're all trying to navigate, and we're not sure how people are going to interact with it. So our approach is provide both options and let the consumers essentially decide what's going to work for them. And it seems like both is working for them right now, which is great.
There's been a big change this year. I mean, I don't know if you know, I'm sure you know a lot of photographers. A lot of the people that I've had on the podcast so far, including, my own experience in my business, the work has seemed to drop off a cliff this year, basically kind of around March. I had a food stylist on last episode who basically was in the place where she went from 40 jobs a year to 17 this year. Yeah. The overall consensus that I'm kind of coming to, and I'd love to get your feedback on this, is one, there was the Olympics. A lot of people pulled from future quarters to pay for and fund that. Sure. In the automotive industry, you had people that were generating content for electric, for hybrid, and for gas all in the 1 year, and then cut that off. You have the election right now, so people didn't want to get lost in the election. A lot of people that were creating content had issues like Bud Light, where they'd shut off and turn off an entire realm of their consumer while trying to attract somebody else, and nobody kind of wanted to go that route.
Yeah,
there's some people that are worried about AI, and then you also have Publicis Group just picked up the company Influential that represents influencers and content generators, and they have over 3.5 million creators, and they're analyzing over 100 billion data points.
Holy moly.
And I've, recently this last week have noticed in my threads that I'm seeing, just kind of regular everyday either influencers or everyday people generating ad-supported content with their iPhone and like Arm & Hammer, laundry detergent, and it's one of those things where I feel like most consumers are kind of looking at ads and being like, I don't want to see that. That's the shiny object. But then when it's an ad that doesn't look like an ad, they're stopping looking and be like, is that an ad? Because it says hashtag ad on it. Why is it saying that? So how is the industry affecting you right now? And what changes have you seen personally, and I guess people you've talked to, and how are they affecting what you guys do in your strategy?
Yeah. So for me personally, I think strategically overall, for the industry overall, the concept of authenticity is not new. We've been hearing for years and years and years, I want more authentic content. I want more authentic content. I want more authentic content. And I think that remains. I think people still move in that direction. I think it has been incredibly and continues to be incredibly hard for anybody to define, right? Like, I think it's a tough thing for people to explain what they mean when they say authentic. I personally tend to think that people mean a look and a feel to something, and they want to feel like it's not an ad or it's real. But the reality is, even like to your point on social, when you look at things that look and feel authentic and then they say ad, maybe a contradiction, maybe not. Maybe that is what people want, right? It's a difficult balance that we're still trying to strike, even with the concept of authenticity and what that means. This is all like my personal 2 cents on this. If you have something that is underexposed and you have something that's difficult to identify and is blurry, that is also authentic. But nobody wants that necessarily advertising for their product either. So there's a look and a feel and a thing that people are generally trying to represent. But I don't think that's I've been hearing that forever. I think the rise of mobile and the rise of decentralization of content overall, maybe the access to what people would consider more authentic looking imagery and authentic content creators more available. Therefore, it's a much, 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 much more crowded space. But the concept of authenticity has been around for a very, very long time. And I'm wrapping everything that you're saying sort of up in authenticity, because what I heard from that was a specific look and type and feel of a piece of content and potentially a certain type of content creator as well. But I think we've been hearing that for years.
With what's going on this year, how has that affected Shutterstock? Has Shutterstock changed anything about the way that they're doing things?
I can't speak to the full year. Shutterstock, like all companies, are going through a period of transition of looking at what works for our customers and what doesn't. We're all sort of in that same boat. It's an evolving ecosystem. So I think there's always going to be an evolution throughout a company's time to figure out, again, how to navigate a new space, whether it's AI, whether it's authenticity, whether it's Shutterstock is not just imagery, Shutterstock's videos, Shutterstock's 3D, Shutterstock's audio. We have a lot of media type. The company has evolved over time, just like while I was at Google evolved over time. Google's evolving right now immensely too, with their AI summaries and a lot of the AI stuff that they're doing. And I think you can look at every single company is evolving, trying to understand the scope of the new world and what it means for them and where they fit into it, for sure.
What would you say are the major buckets of demand that you see across the industry that you need to fill as a company?
I don't want to speak for Shutterstock directly on this particular topic, but I think as an industry as a whole, I think the few of the demands that exist today, definitely training data. People want training data and they want ethically sourced training data. I do think that there's more of a movement from tech companies, new companies, etc., with hearing content creators, individuals who feel that it's important that they have a say in how their content is used. Because I do think just as there are creators out there who are willing to supply their content for various different things without necessarily being paid for it, I think there are people who are also out there who are happy to just provide content. They just want to decide whether they want to provide content or not. I do think that there's a need and an ask for training data from a lot of different places, small companies, large companies, et cetera. I personally find localized content as something that is extremely important, as well as, I don't even want to say DEI content. I just think it should be representative content of people holistically. If we're living in a global world, which we are in a situation where everybody can be global now. Everybody. Like, there's no limit to sort of your business. It's no longer you have to just be in your local little area only talking to your people. You can speak to everybody, but to do that, you also need to put forward the effort to understand everybody and speak to them where they are. So I do think localized content or representative content is extremely important as well. And I think that that's an area of opportunity and a value to everybody holistically.
How much of the decisions that you guys make are based on data?
Well, I'm a very data-driven person, and I'm sure that comes from my experiences over the last few years, but I think there's a balance of data and instinct, and I think for anything that you do, you have to have a balance of both. You want to be able to support your arguments. People that I've worked with over the years and worked at sort of mentoring people and thinking through some of the challenges in this space. I think people can be very, I don't want to say afraid of data, but it's intimidating. It can be very, very intimidating to have a lot of numbers thrown at you if you're not a very numbers person. I'm not a numbers person. I was not good at math growing up. It's just not something that I ever wanted to touch or do. And I think part of going into photography, I was like, oh, thank God, I'm never going to have to deal with like math again. Like, I really think that was like deeply embedded in my soul. And it turns out applying it to my world, using it in a way that helps me understand my world better, I think it's a very, very, very powerful tool. So, all data is sort of math in a lot of ways. And this was a big thing for me at Google, where like people are asking, you got to quantify everything. How do you quantify creativity? And it's sort of like what I went back to about authenticity. Like, how do you define authenticity? It's the same sort of problem, right? All that is a definition. How do you define something? And then how do you quantify it? In the creative space, we see that as really challenging, but I don't think it's impossible to do. And I actually think being a creative person, you're solving those types of problems all the time. I think creative professionals are constantly, especially in a world where, you're trying to do a lot with a little half the time, like all you're doing is quantifying the value of those things to you in the production you're doing or whatever you're doing. And it's the same thing across the board. So, no matter how you're using it, we're all using data all the time. We just don't always realize that's what we're doing. So when we call it, how much do we use data? Yeah, everybody uses data. Whether you're doing a production and a photo shoot, or whether you're like looking at the type of content that you need and who needs it and how you should deliver it, it's all quantifiable. It's all data driven. It's just done in different ways.
With trends happening constantly and evolving and changing constantly, how does a content strategist keep up with demand? As it seems like by the time maybe you've implemented a strategy, the objective or trend has changed. And then what do you see the future of your industry being?
That's a great question. And I think it's just part of being a content strategist is you really have to be open to the opportunity and the changes in front of you and those challenges. I think it is about, I always sort of look at everything as just having like a toolkit. We have a toolkit. It's ever evolving. You have problems in front of you, and then you figure out which tools are the right ones for those solutions. I try and sort of go back and reuse knowledge I've already built to inform new approaches. I would compare it to going back to even just being a photographer. When you first start out doing photography, you're like, oh my God, I have to think about the aperture, and I have to think about the shutter speed, and I have to think about all of these little tiny elements, and you're so focused on that type of stuff that sometimes you're not really thinking about the shot until that stuff becomes second nature to you. And then you start to build and hone those other skills like, your composition and your style and this and that evolves over time, and you can start to bring those things into other spaces. And again, as like, photo moves to photographers, sometimes they're becoming videographers and taking that skill set that you learned from photography and moving it into this new medium. I don't think content strategy or any other type of creative thinking is that different. It's just that we are sort of more than the one thing we think we know, and thinking about how what you have can apply to any given situation is really the direction to head. My least favorite question in the world, I think, is where do you see yourself in 10 years or 5 years? Because I have no idea. If you'd asked me 5 or 10 years ago, I would not have told you Google. I wouldn't have told you Shutterstock, because I didn't think I would leave Google while I was there. Even at the end of Google, I didn't know I was going to leave Google. I think you just look ahead or where you are and what's in front of you, and you have to make decisions as you go and be willing to take that next step and see where it takes you. I don't know where the future will go, but I do know that if people are open-minded enough, working through it is very, very possible.
With content strategy, how much of it is looking into the future of what people might need, and then also trend setting, trying to be experimental in terms of creating something that somebody might want, and then how much of it is data driven?
Great question. Both. I think it is definitely both. I think you use one a bit to inform the other. There are some content strategists, some people in the industry who are phenomenal. The predictive side of things and seeing those trends and understanding those trends and bringing those trends back to the team. I think that is such an incredible and needed skill. But I also see the other side of it, of just like looking at the data to help understand what people need, is equally as important. I think those two things very much go hand in hand. I think about Apple sometimes in this scenario when they made iMac, I think it was at the iMac that they made, where it was sort of like people didn't even know that they needed that, right? Like people didn't know they needed a fun desktop computer, right? And like iPhones, people didn't realize, or Apple realized that they were going to show people what they needed rather than be dictated to from the consumer. Exactly. And I think that both of those are necessary approaches. It's exciting when somebody shows you something or gives you something you didn't know that you needed.
We'll just step right into the 10 questions. It's time for
10 questions. Is that a yes or no, or what do you think?
10 questions. How do you approach scaling content services for a global platform like Shutterstock?
That's a quick, fast 10 question. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, what's your answer? Go.
Yeah, I know. That's why I'm like, oh my God, what's that? Like, what do you want? Like 10? I don't know how long I have.
There's no time
okay,
limit.
Good. Thank God. Yeah, it's tough. Scale is hard. Scale is a balance between sort of understanding horizontally what can be done and is what's good and fast. I think there's a huge balance to strike between good, fast, and cheap in a way, right? Like that's this business triangle, the challenge, and getting to that trifecta is very, very difficult. It's a lot of work and a lot of collaboration and a lot of good people and operations and strategizing. There's no quick answer to this, but it is probably the thing that I'm most passionate about at the end of the day.
What are some challenges you've encountered in implementing generative AI in content creation?
The two biggest challenges that I've seen are, one, just the ethically sourced content overall throughout the industry, period. I think there's still this question around how this all works and what's the right approach, and not one that is going to be easily solved or solved tomorrow and is constantly being discussed and in flux, but I'm just thrilled that it's being discussed. I think the other one is sort of what we talked about before, media provenance. I think is very, very important. Understanding the origin of content, not necessarily that one origin of content is better than another, but the disclosure of that information information to a consumer to make an informed decision around how they understand their world, I think is a really big challenge that is also not resolved, that also is requiring a lot of thought and discussion. For both of those issues, it takes sort of the entire value chain, the entire ecosystem chain to have that discussion, to get to, or to at least have some active participation to get to a resolution. And I think we have a long way to go on that front.
How has your experience at Google influenced your work in content authenticity and AI?
Just talked about that a little while ago, where part of the team internally who worked through how we want to work on this, we did the IPTC release as a first step into at least providing some information to users, and then looking at what the options are in terms of bringing more visibility to users. It definitely sparked a lot of discussion and debate and helped inform my view of the world. Google is not a company that says this is right and this is wrong. They provide information, and then users make sense of the world from the information that Google provides. But I think, they've had for a very long time the slogan of don't be evil. They want to do what's right by users. And they firmly believe that providing information and the right information so that users can make informed decisions is very useful. They've done a lot of work in that space in terms of information literacy. I think that not everybody realizes how much work goes into that and how much there actually is that's available to them. I see this as a part of it, and I see this as something that they've been trying to do. It's absolutely influenced my own opinions about how to handle it, and how also not to just jump into assumptions that everything that's AI generated should be labeled AI generated. Because if you label everything AI generated, well, one, it's very difficult to actually do that. But also, if there's content out there that's AI generated without an AI generated label, people will assume it's real. And that's a problem too. So there's a lot of nuances that need to be thought through in terms of the difficulties that happen in that space.
Which project are you most proud of from your time at Google, and why?
I do think that the work that we did on once generative launched with IPTC and C2PA, and again, the information literacy work, the collaboration with that team was very exciting. I'm very proud of that work. That work is absolutely still going. I just saw some of the team recently and speak at DMLA conference, and it was a really, really incredible presentation. Oh man, I don't know. We did the Olympics on search. We've done
That's so cool.
It was so cool. We did live photos of the Olympics on search. Was so cool. Did the Met Gala on search, on the front page of search. It's tough because there's just you get to influence, the world sees that. It's great. And I think having the conversations with PMs and others so that they understand that what they put forward makes a difference is really important. That alone is just an accomplishment, whether something showed up or didn't because of that conversation, I think is probably the thing that I care most deeply about.
If you had to pick, what's been the most game-changing development in content strategy?
It's hard to say. I think the internet overall, I know AI will probably have a major impact here. I think it sort of remains to be seen as to how we use it in a lot of ways. I think to date, just the internet overall and the proliferation of media and content across the web, just the growth, it's a real challenge to keep up with all the content needs at the pace and speed, but also at the expectation, as we all know, of cost, is hard. I think it has changed everything for all of us, and obviously we're all still trying to navigate it, but that's an impact on content strategy as well, because I think the world that we all sort of grew up in and knew or thought we knew is changing. So it's a challenge to navigate that for sure.
Yeah, it seems like we're kind of like that. The last 2 or 3 years have been kind of like that strategy hill, right? And it feels like we're right at that point where it's like, all right, what do you got? Type of thing.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting.
Yeah.
How do you balance creativity with technical demands of AI-driven content?
Can you expand on that a little bit?
People have a lot of issues with trying to get AI to put out exactly what they're getting at. When someone's putting in a prompt for what they want exactly, how do you go with, oh, you need to literally say what they're saying versus, oh, we need to implement this creativity or this look into, how do you balance creativity with what people are asking?
It's funny because like as you started saying that, I was like, forget AI. Half the time you can't get people to say what they need from creative. Like this is like you've got people trying to tell a machine how to generate something creative, and it's already hard enough to like go to a regular person and say, what do you want? And have them describe it to you. It's like,
I mean, my job as a photographer is 90% showing people what doesn't work because everybody has an idea and I have to be like, we're not going to do that. But I can show you so you can know that it doesn't work. And then we can do what we originally came here to do. But,
Right. Exactly. And it's sort of, if you think about it, it's a little bit like, that's what AI is like. This is what you asked for. And then it's like, it's not quite what I asked for. And it's like, I don't know. It seems like what you asked for, but it's like a lot of, right now, at least, I mean, it can't read our minds. And I also, again, going back to like authenticity, it's hard to describe this stuff, it really is. And I think I've seen certainly like looking at, I've played around with all of the AI tools and you see prompts that are coming from people who have a creative background that are like aspect ratios and are, depth of field and specific lighting techniques and are really like fine tuning and honing that type of stuff. Whereas other people would just go in and by other people, I actually mean like me, who would just be like, person on a background with color, it's like not a good prompt. But it's still interesting to watch.
I did a job just a year ago. Car company came to me and asked me to do a video on the life cycle of their and as well as how they improve their process year over year. So and they had a very small budget, but it was internally. So they were like, go ahead and use AI because we don't need to worry about licensing. So if it wasn't for the word isometric POV, I wouldn't have been able to do the 32 illustrations I had to do. But, I used AI to take what an engineer told me and put that into a script, and then used my voice to then convert to somebody else's, and then used isometric POVs of illustrations and descriptions to then be able to animate these things within a video. So it was all kind of AI, and it came down to exactly like how I was explaining these things. And then if it wasn't for that isometric, none of it would have been a cohesive look across all the perspectives. So it was very interesting. That one key word is kind of like I spent days literally combing through prompts on Midjourney in order to be able to find like, how do I consistently get the same look out of every single, mentioning like a render engine as well as a POV. And it finally was like money. But then it was like, oh, we got to come out with an update. I might be screwed, in the entire process.
I'm just curious. So are you actively doing more with AI in your world? Are you doing more sort of jobs? Are you finding like, how is it working for you?
I use AI in every single aspect of everything that I do.
Amazing.
Even for this podcast, like the questions I run through ChatGPT, my contracts, the breakdown, all that stuff is all done, with AI. With interviews where people have mentioned a certain word and didn't say the entire company, and we're asking if I could replace the name of the company with the full name. Uploaded the transcript to ChatGPT. How many times did this person say this word or whatever? Or they asked me like, oh, why did I cut it down so much? I'm like, well, you said the word like 583 times.
Exactly.
AI voice conversion. This sound, because we're remote, the Zoom doesn't really do well with audio. So I take the audio from the iPhone, I run that through Adobe Podcast. It filters out all of the background noise, hums, or any type of low frequency. It boosts your vocals and digitizes it. So that way your voice and my voice sound exactly the same no matter where we are.
Wow.
I did an interview
awesome.
with somebody who was in their garage and it was an echo. It was a cement chamber and it cleaned up everything. And it sounded like we were in the same room talking to each other.
Wow.
So I use it
Wow.
for every aspect of everything that I do. My to-do list, my calendars, my shoots. It's interesting though, because with this particular interview, last night I was using ChatGPT as a dictation, in terms of a conversation, because it has a memory now. It can review my notes that I created with the emails that I had sent you. I double check my checklist and all that stuff is all gone through there. So it knows everything that I've written to you, because I'll download the transcript from this interview and then ask it for the summary that I'll put up on Google and Spotify, and it'll break that up. It helps me write the witty intro that I do in the beginning.
Yeah.
And then I was having a conversation last night, like, hey, let's go over our notes. Let's go over the questions. Let's go over everything. And somehow it switched to you from Shutterstock to Flickr. I didn't even think of it, because
notice it. Yeah.
so much of my mind relies on, hey, you have a memory of everything we've discussed and the things we don't want to talk about, as well as the strategy and theme across the podcast, keeping that in mind, so it knows what that objective is.
Yeah.
And it knows I'd like a little bit of fun chat and weird questions, but also like not to sound too stale and too weird that it's noticeable that AI is getting involved in the process. So it's literally involved in every single portion of what I do. Like I had to write a grant for my kid's school to bring in a music program, and I've never written a grant, but they were like, hey, can you do it? And I was like, yep. Sure. Literally in 3 hours later, I wrote the entire grant. I input the school's budget, the people that were in charge, everything they had asked for, as well as how is information being applied to education and changes in the future. And, it's like without that, there's no way I would be able to do half the things I do in the amount of time that I do them now without using AI.
Wow.
It's changed retouching for me in a way where there's certain things where perfection's required. AI is restricted in its resolution capabilities.
Yeah.
So a lot of times where I'm working on like a high resolution campaign for, a company like Press, for example, I'll use it a little bit for certain changes, but then I have to go in and kind of like, do what I would normally do to be able to get it to look like it's up to that resolution and it's not noticeable.
Yep.
There's still issues with image extension where I have to add a certain, +3 or -3 on brightness and contrast in order to get it to match the edges.
Yeah.
Because things aren't perfect. Or, I'll do things for like a clothing brand where, yoga outfits, and they want every single crease and whatever removed. And there's, 40 or 50 images in a job that might, I have to remove those as well as replace the fabric texture. And jobs like that would normally be like 20, 30K, with that type of level. But now I'm able to do them for like 5 to 10. It's interesting. People are like, oh, what do you use for prompts and everything like that? The only thing that I use is the word remove. That's
awesome. I love that.
It's all about your selection. So if you select something a certain way, it knows. I've noticed that a lot of the things that they're developing now, they want the art director to be able to say, circle something on a
and then get rid of it. Yeah.
Rather than say, these are the changes I want, be able to just do that and implement that. And a lot of it is technical know-how of how AI is going to interpret your information that you get. Because all it is it knows what I know. I just need to know how it handles what I'm going to tell it, and vice versa.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a tool.
Yeah. It's a tool just like everything else. And all the other people I've spoken to in the industry, it's, they, in terms of creating content, it's, it's like CG. It's a different avenue.
Yes.
It's now a subcategory of everything that they're doing. Everybody wants to incorporate it, but it was like, when it first came out, everybody had seen everything they'd ever thought of all within, 3 months of each other. And everybody was oversaturated and like numb to everything. So it's like the weirdest things are going viral now. And I feel like it's because people are numb to things, but also the things that were viral before AI came out might not necessarily be viral now, because there's a little bit more, I feel, culture and classic that stimulate the algorithms, as opposed to like shock value, because you've seen everything. You literally can't, and the more you see everything, the less sensitive to things I feel like you become.
I mean, it's really interesting to hear how you're using it and that it's so much a part of your workflow. I see it as a tool as well, and I think it's exciting. Like I'm excited by I'm always excited by change. I just am. This is just me in general. If I sit still too long, I literally fall asleep. It's a big problem for me. If I don't move, I fall asleep. So I always want to go, but I always want to learn, and I always want to test. And I also know that I am not the expert in a lot of places and spaces. I'm just not. And that, everything that you've just said is incredible, and all things that I don't do because I'm not in your field, but are exciting to hear and are opportunities to learn, in my opinion. We've always, in this industry especially, I think, there's been this really weird and challenge and balance between information sharing and, oh, it has to be my thing and my stuff because it's, my clients and this and that. And, how do you balance those two things? But I think this is a great time for information sharing about what the opportunities are and what you can do with this stuff and how you can use it to help and move things forward. That's very cool that you're so deeply ingrained in this world.
For CGI, it's massive. I can use it.
Yeah.
Well, and also web development. I'm not a web developer, but what I can do is I can go to a website that I like. I can copy the source code and ask it, and I can have it say, hey, I want to be able to do this on my website. What do I have to do? It gives me the code. Same thing with Python and 3ds Max. It can write code for particles, for things like that.
Yep.
I had a lifelong dream of when I was a kid, I wanted to be able to create an app. Remember you're a kid, you're like digging in your backyard. You're like, dude, if we dug right here, we'd go straight to China.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to know on my app, wherever I was, that if I were to dig straight down, where I would end up.
Oh, that's awesome.
So I developed this app with AI.
Oh my God.
It helped me write the app program, develop the whole thing, only to find out that 73% of the Earth's surface is covered with water.
Sad.
And that there were only
Yes, that's true.
only 3 major locations where you would actually end up on another landmass if you were to dig straight down. So that kind of ended that. I was like, why isn't this an app yet? It's a great idea.
But even that, I'm like, well, what are those 3? Now I just want to know what those 3 places are.
I think it was Chile, China, and Spain, and maybe parts of New Zealand.
Yeah, the code stuff is cool. I just saw a news article. I actually had to look it up the other day that over 25% of Google's code is now written by AI. I don't know if you saw that news story.
No, I didn't. But I doubt it. It's just, I don't write code, and it's amazing for actually everything that I've needed or wanted to do.
And this is where you were asking about data and math and how do you use it. This is where I also think it can provide a lot of value for people who have not tried this. You can take spreadsheets, Word docs, you can take whatever you want. You can put it into certainly ChatGPT, I'm sure many other services, and ask it to distill information and ask it questions about the data that you have and have it do a lot of that for you. And I think it's a really helpful start to people who aren't familiar. I had that conversation recently with somebody who is quite intimidated by data and how do you deal with it? And I was like, you should try this. I was like, if you don't want to be the one to learn to parse it and you don't have anybody to go to, try this, see if it works for you. If nothing else, it'll give you where better to ask questions that you're afraid to ask anywhere else than to a machine.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I used to use it for writing studies for stock charts,
Yeah.
People are like, it's going to get rid of humans and things like that. I'm like, I have to back test everything that it gives me. I used to use it for, like you said, accounting, and
totally
the numbers were off every single, sometimes it's off, sometimes so he inputted in is wrong.
Absolutely. I think this goes back to the information literacy thing, which is this goes for everything. AI or not, especially today, this, you have to vet your sources, you have to double check, you have to understand, you have to dig deeper. We can't take things at face value because there's so much information out there and it's coming from so many places and it's hard to know what's right and wrong. And people need to remember that AI is getting its information from the same place and those same places, but times a bajillion. Yes, we have to vet everything that it's giving back to us. But hopefully, I will say hopefully because I want to be hopeful. Hopefully it'll all improve over time and hopefully we can get to a place where it's a useful tool for us and that it improves and it improves with us helping to improve it to a point that it's useful in the right way. I came from Google. I know a lot of engineers and I have cousins that are in engineering and who are just out of school. That's, there's concern from everybody, but, we've seen a lot of change. I am bullish on the fact that I think this is more change that we'll be able to navigate in the right way.
What skills do you think are essential for success in content strategy today?
Openness and willingness and being really, really open to the world in front of you, critical thinking. I think all of that is very, very important. Like I said, the thing that we learned in school or the one thing we thought we would do is what defines us. I strongly feel that we are more than the sum of our parts in a lot of ways. And knowing that is what allows sort of content and strategy in general to just keep moving forward as things change around us.
Which moment in your career has been the most transformative for your growth?
Google, I think, by far has been the most transformative for me. At HuffPost AOL, because I was at HuffPost, but I was also working at AOL, I built out an asset management system there. I came in and I saw the system that existed and I was like, this should be better. We can do better. I had an opportunity to work with an engineering team. I was a photo director of HuffPost. It didn't take that long, which is quite impressive, to rebuild the system and roll it out to the whole company. And that was a great experience, and kept iterating on it and kept making changes and looking at data. And one of the engineers said to me probably a year into that process, I was only there for like 3.5 years. He said, you're a product manager. And I went, what's a product manager? It's like, I'm a photo director. Oh, like, what are you talking about? I don't even know what that is. Funny enough, I end up, 2 or 3 years later at Google, sort of doing a little bit of the same thing and becoming a product manager at Google. The ability to do that at HuffPost and AOL and work for the first time with an engineering team and developing requirements, but not really knowing what I was doing, but building something that was very successful at the time was incredibly pivotal for me, sort of knowing where I wanted to go and I think what I was good at and what I like to do. Ending up at Google, having the opportunity to do that there, but do think that there are some very unique things about working at Google, the way that they operate. I don't want to say taught to think, but the way that you think or harness thinking maybe that you already had that you didn't realize you could leverage in a certain way. I value that immensely and will carry that with me forever because it showed me again that I'm more than the sum of my parts. I am capable of much, much more. And it's the way that I think, not what I do, that gets me there. And I think Google really showed me that.
It's really cool. I think that's really important. What are you most excited about in the future of content creation and strategy?
I'm excited to see where we go from here. I don't know. I have seen some cool stuff, even coming to Shutterstock. Like, yes, I was at Google and Google is cool and they do very cool things. Coming to Shutterstock, oh my God, they're doing some cool things at Shutterstock. Like some of the 3D that TurboSquid has done and that Shutterstock Studios is doing, AI, and how do we harness the up and coming technologies. We just recently acquired Envato. Some of the things that they're doing are incredible.
I use all these things, by the way. TurboSquid, Envato. Oh my God, yeah. Like this is totally nuts.
And they're doing such cool work. Just exciting time for content creation, which is like this mix of creativity and technology. I mean, I'm sure it's always been there, like you said, like CGI. Similar to the democratization of many, many other things, it's been over here. And to me, even in my world, that's a world that I haven't really known. And now I get to like immerse myself in it much more. So I'm excited. I'm excited to see what comes from it.
That would be so cool to be able to go to one hub and be able to put in, like, describe the world that you want to be able to create a story in, and then have TurboSquid give you the elements you need to put in your CG world, get Envato to give you the soundtracks to like the sounds of what things would sound like within that environment, and then have Shutterstock be able to supply the HDRIs that you would need to be able to get these worlds to. Anyways, I'll stop dreaming.
No, I'm like, no, please keep going. What are we?
Like, but like the future year, I like triggered a thing. I'm like, workflow. So anyways.
Yeah, it's great. I think that's also what's needed. And, again, I know I'm 6 months in. I'm not supposed to say this anymore. I've spent a lot of my time learning what's going on at Shutterstock, right? Like now I'm like, okay, I've like, what are we doing at Shutterstock? Okay, we have Shutterstock, which Premium Beat, we have Envato, we have TurboSquid, we have Pond 5, we have all of these different things. Now it's much more about what do people want, right? What do we need? We have all this incredible stuff. How are people leveraging it today? What do people want that's better? Like, how do we bridge those gaps in, and how can we just do better? I just want to know what people need and get it to them. And that's always how I've been. That's how I was when I talk about like HuffPost AOL. I was like, what do the people in the newsroom need? How do we get it to them? And it was like, cool. What do the products need? How do we get it to them? And here it's like, what do people need? How do we get it to them? Like, to me, that's what this is all about, is content. Just getting people what they need, where they need it, when they need it.
Like you said, supply the tools that people need in order to be able to tell the stories that they want to be able to tell. And I think a creator series would be kind of cool to then be able to see how they're able to utilize all these tools to execute the final project, and then
absolutely
inspire other people that would not even think of being able to use these things this way to then be able to go to places that they, I mean, I have a dream like diary of things that I've wanted to create, like places that look like Iceland with blood colored water and being at night with stars over ice lakes. And, it would be so nice to be able to, but it would take me months to be able to create a scene like this and then, stories inside of it. So
interesting.
10 questions or whatever that was.
10 questions.
Is there anything you would tell your younger self, knowing what you know now?
I've thought about this, but I moved to New York, not knowing anybody or anything, just knowing I wanted to move to New York and not having a job, and I just got to get a job in publishing. I've just always put one foot in front of the other. Not a photographer technically, but I've always used my creative skills. Just keep going. I don't know. It's just don't second guess. I know what I would tell other people that I feel get analysis paralysis, and that's not my uncle told me when I was younger. He heard it somewhere and it was great, and it stuck with me my whole life. That's all the best I can do with that whole story. But he always said to me, if you don't go, you can't come back. And that just resonated with me my whole life, which was just there's no harm in doing something else, because you can usually go back. Now, I realize in the job world, that's not always true. You probably can't go back to the job that you just had. That's a reality. But in the greater scheme of things, if you try something new and you don't like it, you can go back sort of to what you were at least doing before in some capacity. But there's not really a harm in trying something new. For me, my attitude was one foot in front of the other. You fall asleep if you're sitting still. So just keep going, ask for help along the way.
With that said, what advice would you have for somebody that's looking to get into content strategy?
I've talked to a lot of people who are coming up and want to know that it'll be okay. What are the exact steps that I can take to get this to happen? There isn't a blueprint to doing it. There's just not. Remaining open to opportunities and to your own abilities and balancing those things, I think is extremely important. Also asking for help, also not thinking that you know everything, talking to people, not being afraid to ask questions, not being afraid to reach out. And also just creating those relationships of people that you can know for years and years and years, even if you don't talk to each other all the time, knowing that you can go back to them. I think all of those things are extremely important, and that your career may not take the exact path that you think it will, and that's okay, because if it doesn't, all that means is it's growth in a different direction. You might be able to give somebody direction from the way you've learned later on in your career. So, keep an open mind.
Your story for me is really inspiring. So with that said, how would people be able to find you and kind of keep in touch and track your story?
Find me on LinkedIn, and you can find me at Instagram at Anna G. Dickson. And those are the places I'm most active.
Again, I know you're a very busy person, and I appreciate your time. I want to thank you so much for coming out and sharing your story, as well as everything else you've opened up about. And
awesome.
I wish you the very best of luck, and I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. This has been fun, and look forward to seeing you again.
And that's a wrap. Just fix it in post.